Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues and guests. Today is December 23, 2020, 4 p.m. Moscow time, and led the meeting of the Dissertation Council for the defense of the dissertation by Rodin Andrei in fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Doctor of Sciences in Philosophy in Major 090008, Philosophy in Science and Technology, on the topic Axiomatic Architecture of Scientific Theory, be considered open. By the order of St. Petersburg State University dated September 15, 2020, order number 83811, Lada Vladimira Shapovalova, Doctor of Philosophy, Head of the Department of Philosophy of Science and Technology at St. Petersburg State University, was appointed the Chairman of the Dissertation Council. By the same order, were approved the members of the Dissertation Council. They include Lysenuk Yelena, Doctor of Philosophy, Professor of the Department of Logic at St. Petersburg State University. In the remote access mode, we have Mikrotomov Ivan, Doctor of Philosophy, Head of the Department of Logic at St. Petersburg State University. Can you hear and see us?
Yes, I can.
Ivan Borisovich? Yes, I can hear you. Nikonenko Sergey, Doctor of Philosophy, Professor of the Department of Ontology and Theory of Knowledge of St. Petersburg State University. Can you hear us? Yes, thank you. Drugalina Chornaya Yelena, Doctor of Philosophy, Head of the Laboratory, Chief Researcher, International Laboratory of Logic, Linguistics and Formal Philosophy, National Research University, High School of Economics. Can you hear and see us? Great. Petonkin Alexander, Doctor of Philosophy, Professor of the Department of Philosophy and Methodology of Science, Lomonosov, Moscow State University. Can you hear us? Great. Professor Klaus Mainzer, PhD, Technical University of Munich, Germany. Can you hear us?
Yeah, thank you. I can hear you.
The applicant is also present, and this is Rodin Andrei Vячеславович. In order to improve the quality of communication, I ask you, dear colleagues, those who are on remote mode, turn off your microphones, please, but do not forget to turn them on when you're given the floor. I also inform you that audio and video recording of our meeting is being conducted and live broadcast on the SPBU website is performed. Also, simultaneous translation is being carried out. The email address of the State Council is posted online, where during the meeting all listeners can express their opinions and send questions to the applicant, concerning the dissertation and the current scientific discussion of the speech. These questions will be forwarded to me by the technical service, and I will voice them during the discussion. Questions must be related to the applicant's presentation and the contents of the thesis. The name, the place of work, and the position of the author of the question must be indicated. Questions are not related to the scientific discussion and the topic of the thesis will not be voiced. In accordance with the procedure for awarding the scientific degree of Candidate for Sciences, the scientific degree of Doctor of Sciences at St. Petersburg State University, approved by local regulations by St. Petersburg State University, the Dissertation Council consists of 7 people, and 2/3 of the approved members should consist. All 7 who form the Dissertation Council are present, including 5 board members in remote interactive mode. All the members of the Dissertation Council and the applicant are provided with audio-visual contact, thus there is a quorum. I established the following rules of the procedure for today's meeting of the Dissertation Council, with a total duration of approximately 2 hours. First, a brief report of the chairman on the documents submitted by the applicant for a scientific degree and their compliance with the established requirements. Answers to possible questions, 5 minutes. 2, a short presentation by the doctoral candidate, reflecting the main points of the research, 15 minutes. 3, questions to the applicant strictly according to the report, not more than 2 minutes per question. 4. The applicant answers. No more than 5 minutes for all the answers. 5. Speeches of all the members of the Dissertation Council in turn with their assessment of the dissertation research and the applicant's speech, with a summary of their positions, with questions and suggestions for the dissertation. Approximately 10 minutes per speaker. 6. Speech by the chairman with the assessment of the thesis. About 10 minutes. 7. Answers of the doctoral candidate for a scientific degree to questions and comments of the members of the Dissertation Council. No more than 20 minutes. 8. Open discussion, speech at the request of those present at the defense of the dissertation with a summary of their positions and or specific questions and proposal to the doctoral candidate strictly on the topic of research. No more than 2 minutes per person. At the same time, we ask everyone to register in the registration form and introduce themselves before you're speaking. 9. Voicing the questions addressed to the applicant which came through the online broadcasting of the meeting of the Dissertation Council on the St. Petersburg State University website. 10. Answers of the applicants, no more than 2 minutes per question. 11. Discussion by the members of the Dissertation Council before an open vote of the result of the defense, during which the broadcast sound is muted. About 5 minutes. 12. Open roll call. Counting of votes by the chairman of the Dissertation Council with the entry of the result into the minutes of the meeting. 13. Making decision on whether or not to award an academic degree. 14. Concluding remarks of the applicant, no more than 2 minutes. Dear colleagues, are there any questions or objections to the procedure? Thank you. If there are no objections, I'll proceed to the implementation of the rules of the meeting. First of all, please turn off the sound of your mobile phones. Dear colleagues on the Dissertation Council, I ask you not to take your phones far away. So in case we need, we'll be able to contact you. Thank you for your understanding. So the meeting is open. The dissertation, the thesis by Rodin Andrei for the degree of Doctoral of Sciences in Philosophy in the major 090008 Philosophy of Science and Technology on the topic Axiomatic Architecture of Scientific Theories was accepted for defense by Order Scientific Secretary of St. Petersburg State University of September the 9th, 2020, number 78671. Rodin Andrei wrote the thesis on the basis of St. Petersburg State University. The number of publication of the applicant in which the main scientific results of the dissertation are stated, according to the presented list, are 33 works. In peer-reviewed scientific publications from the list approved by the Ministry of Education and Science of the Russian Federation, 13 publications. In publication indices in the scientific databases of Web of Science and Scopus, 5 publications. The applicant submitted to the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg State University a complete package of documents for acceptance and defense of the dissertation. All documents correspond to the clause 12 of section 3 of the procedure. All the documents submitted by the doctoral candidate, according to the information that I have received from the curator, meet the requirements and are stored in the applicant certification file. Copies of them are held by the employee of the department for the provision of the Dissertation Council, who is now attending the meeting. Before giving the floor to the applicant, dear members of the Dissertation Council, do you have any general question to the applicant, including whether there is a need to announce and consider the entire list of documents submitted by the applicant? No questions. So we move to the short presentation by the doctoral candidate. Andrei Vyacheslamovich, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Dear members of the Dissertation Council, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to present the results of my research in the oldest university of Russia in front of such audience. The work presented by me belongs to the philosophy of science, but at the same time, a significant place in it is occupied by mathematics and logic. History of mutual relationship between natural sciences, mathematics and logic has been going on for more than 2 millennia, and has a number of dramatic episodes, including so-called the scientific revolution of the 17th century, associated with the rejection of Aristotelian logic as a main tool for constructing scientific theory. At the turn of the 19th and 20th century, the story takes an important turn in connection with the radical reform of the traditional logic undertaken by Gottlob Frege and later Bertrand Russell, and in connection to the crisis of the foundation of mathematics, in relation to which new logical ideas and approach displayed a key role. The question of axiomatic structure of scientific theories in the 20th century is related to the first line with the name of David Hilbert. It was him who formulated the concept of axiomatic theory, axiomatic method of constructing theories, which are commonly called modern. Hilbert's axiomatic ideas had a great influence on the mathematical and philosophical logic in the 20th century, on the foundations of mathematics and the philosophy of science. However, it was not only a success story. In the philosophical and logical literature works, it has been discussed the limitations of the formal axiomatic approach in the Hilbert-style approach, associated with theorems of incompleteness of Gödel and other similar matter-theoretical results. In my thesis, I explored the limitations of Hilbert-style axiomatic approach of different kind, namely the limitations of these epistemic goals that can be achieved and were actually achieved throughout the 20th century with the help of the axiomatic approach proposed by Hilbert. The main idea of this part of the thesis, based on the analysis of practices of using Hilbert-style axiomatic methods in mathematics and natural sciences, is that this method allows you to successfully resolve a wide range of meta-theoretical problems related to this theory, but at the same time, as a rule, proves inefficient as a standard means of representation of mathematical and natural science knowledge in scientific communication and education. This inference is the main idea of the first proposition for defense. The field of scientific communication and education is considered by some philosophers of science as practical and thus undissolving systematic philosophical analysis. Well, I cannot agree with this point of view. In my opinion, only comprehensive analysis of scientific practices of the past and the present can allow the philosophy of science to remain the sphere of the subject of his or her philosophical interest. I consider it important to emphasize that this applies not only to the social aspects of scientific practice, but to the logical and epistemological aspects which I focus on in my thesis. The problem of the logical form of the presentation of scientific knowledge nowadays has particular importance in connection with the development and implementation of digital presentation methods and the transfer of knowledge, which plays an increasingly important role in the economy and social life. Philosophical expertise can be helpful and necessary not only to analyze the consequences of this post facto, but also in order to concentrate on the development towards the public good. Logic and epistemology as regulatory disciplines can, in my opinion, should make an important contribution to the solution of this problem. The main result of the research is the non-standard concept of axiomatic method, which, following Hilbert and Bernays, I call constructive. This method combines capabilities of the standard axiomatic method and the so-called genetic method of constructing concepts and theories, which Hilbert considered as a traditional alternative to the new axiomatic method. The genetic construction of the theory includes construction theoretical objects and theoretical concepts from some previously known objects and concepts. Constructing methods allows to use these methods with the help of the formal rules, which sometimes are interpreted as logical inference methods, or in other cases the way of reproducing non-propositional methods. Non-propositional methods and constructions are used as the proof of the truthfulness of certain propositions, thus having logical function. The unity of this multi-layered semantics allows us to create logical and extra-logical method which can be used in scientific research and experiments. In our opinion, such methods could be considered as an integral part of any scientific theory and not only as supplementary materials which used by the scientists with procedural knowledge how and plays as important role as propositional knowing what. The statement that the constructive axiomatic method of represented knowledge better corresponds to the tasks and goals of modern science than the Hilbert-style axiomatic method is the main content of the third proposition for defense. As the main theoretical prototype of the above outlined formal architecture of theory, I used the homotopy type theory created in the end of 2000s by the late brilliant compatriot, Fields Medal laureate, mathematician Vladimir Voevodsky, with whom I was lucky to cooperate. The key innovation introduced by HTT semantics in the constructive theory of types is that it allows you to distinguish between logical and extra-logical fragments of the semantic using the concept of a homotopy level of the type. On this theoretical basis, Voevodsky initiated the project of constructing new univalent foundations of mathematics, which, unlike standard axiomatic foundations of mathematical theories, allow an efficient computational implementation of formalized theories and computer verification of complex mathematical proofs. The constructive axiomatic method described by me in the thesis can be viewed as an attempt to extend Voevodsky's approach to engulf a wider class of theories, including physical and other natural science theories. In addition to homotopy type theory, the constructive axiomatic method also has more distant historical prototypes, including the geometry of Euclid, in its original form, in which the construction of geometric objects with a compass and a ruler plays a key role in the proof of all non-trivial theorems. As motivation of the concept of constructive axiomatic method, it was also for me important to use the ideas of Andrei V concerning calculus problems, considerations of Vladimir Smirnov on the prospects formalization of genetic methods, and the original axiomatic approach of William Lever, who in one of his key words characterized logic as a special case of geometry. The concept of internal logic of a category formulated in Lever's theory plays a key role in constructive axiomatic architecture, since it allows you to consider logical operation of relationship as a special case of operation and relationship of a geometric nature. Explication of the concept of internal logic in the sense of Lever, an indication of the epistemological significance of this concept, constitutes the second proposition for defense. Constructive approach to the axiomatization of scientific theories continues and develops the so-called semantic view on theories, which is also called non-propositional. This approach was initiated in the 1950s by Patrick Supes and is currently shared by a number of leading philosophers of science, including Bas van Fraassen. The main thesis of this semantic approach is that scientific theory must be identified not with the deductive ordered system of propositions as usually done today in mathematical and philosophical logic, but with a certain class of modals, which generally speaking might have different synthetic representation, different variants of axiomatization. The advantage of the approach proposed in the thesis is that it involves the use of new logical and mathematical means for its implementation, including HTT. The standard semantic approach uses a Bourbaki-style axiomatic methods that allows to move away from the didactic details of the theory only by abandoning the strict formal control of reasoning. The constructive method of axiomatic representation of theories does not require such a compromise. It allows the possibility of computational implementation, allowing formal computer verification of reasoning, and thus support other functions requiring the use of computer. Also, the proposed in the thesis, the constructive view of the theory, has already mentioned, allows to formally represent and to consider its full elements of the theory, non-logical methods of a substantiation theoretical statement that play an important role in mathematized natural sciences. In conclusion, I'd like to say a few words about open problems and further research that I plan to carry out. Although the constructive axiomatic architecture assumes the possibility of being used in natural sciences and engineering scientists. All prototypes of constructive axiomatic theories belong to the field of pure mathematics. This is due to the fact that mathematics serves as a kind of testing ground for theoretical thought, allowing the development and testing of new theoretical ideas. Hilberg's axiomatic method was also first formulated and tested on example of mathematical theories, and the same can be applied to the semantic method of Supes and his followers, which, from a technical point of view, is an attempt to use the Bourbaki-style axiomatic method outside pure mathematics. Systematic formal reconstruction of modern physical and non-mathematical theories using the method proposed in the dissertation remains today an open problem. And I plan to guide my efforts to the solution of this problem. The first step after the defending my thesis, I've prepared an article for publication on the completed project of Novelty in the field of mathematical biology. In addition, the dissertation contains some more specific questions which are not systematically studied. Those include the questions of the boundaries of logic and consent of homotopy type theory, the question of the implementation of a constructive axiomatic architecture in computer systems for representing knowledge, and the question of methods of substantiating knowledge when using such computer technologies. I plan to study these problems in the nearest future. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Andrei V. Are there any questions to the doctoral candidate related to the report? Since there are no questions, then we move on. We move on to the second part of the meeting. That's the reports and reviews of the members of the Citation Council. Questions related to the thesis. The doctoral candidate might answer each review in particular, or all questions in a row after all the reviews have been read. We do not have any external reviews. Thus, we move on to the reviews of the Dissertation Council members. And since all the reviews were published beforehand on the St. Petersburg State University website, thus I propose to the members of the Dissertation Council to read only the key points of the reviews, questions to the applicant. Are there any objections? Thank you. Then we move on to the reviews, and I give the floor to Helena Lysanyuk. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here in person and to begin to discuss this marvelous thesis by Andrei V. related to the epistemological influence of axiomatic architecture of scientific theories. Axiomatic architecture of scientific theories is presented as a multi-story construction, which is based on the basis first layer, where the propositions can be received from the ground propositions, which could be considered truthful. And the usage of the logical part of the theory, which can use the architecture itself. It reminds us how we all study geometry and mathematics based on the textbooks by Kolmogorov, who is also mentioned in this thesis. He tells us about the three-part system of the history of axiomatic architecture. In the idea, it is presented at school textbooks, where additional construction helps to work on the reduction of the truthful statements. This allows us to talk about the axiomatic architecture of scientific theories in the aspect of argumentation. From the point of view of providing proof, talking about the truthfulness of a certain proposition, in the idea, as Vladimir Uspensky said, that proof is reasoning that equips the listener thus that he or she is able to use this idea to prove this idea to others. Thus, to use what we've learned at school in the practical domain that is in life. The idea of epistemological influence of the theories is related to the context of computer-based proof, when it is necessary to provide the epistemic completeness of the proposition. In order to show that HGT is reflected in the three types, which include local, global, and interim, the researcher formulates it in relation to the axiomatic theory, how these formal axiomatic theories are based on the Hilbert-style theories, and whether they can be considered adequate models to the mathematical scientific theories. In which respect can all these theoretical constructs equip us with certain knowledge and truths which we can apply in our practical life? And in such a formulation, this research might require a reconsideration of Hilbert program. But the researcher also talks about limitation, which limits and actualizes the project in the sphere of philosophy. The researcher says that scientific and mathematical theories provide certain truths, but they also provide justification of these ideas based on other types that they use for their justification. But in order for them to provide certain truths considering the theory of life, it is necessary to create the model of reality, part of fragment of life, which also forms part of this theory. Thus, I would like to voice some of my comments. Despite the fact that the dissertation attempts good attempts to draw a distinction between the axiomatic way of constructing a theory and its semantics, it carefully bypasses aspects of using philosophical or intentional semantics for meaningful interpretation of theory. Then it is not quite clear why the first flaw of scientific theory has its semantics interpreting logical constants, which usually considered a philosophical part. The second remark is linked to the first one, talking about the limitation on the dissemination of the normative status from evidence built on Hilbert's style for axiomatic mathematical and scientific theories and their content. The author associates this distribution with proving theorems, including justifying the acceptance of the corresponding axioms, and the use or non-use of certain rules of inference are left aside, which is not quite clear why. And the third remark, it is not entirely clear how the dissertation carries out the distinction between logical and non-logical turn. In particular, to which type does topos and category relate to and why? Despite the above-mentioned remarks, the research work meets the well-developed research and is the result of the many years of research. The results of the thesis were provided in many conferences, and Andrei V Rodin is considered to be an expert in the area, and many colleagues were surprised by the fact that Andrei Rodin is not yet the Doctor of Sciences. Well, the thesis meets the basic requirements established by the order of St. Petersburg State University, and the works published reflect the main ideas presented in the research. The doctoral candidate deserves awarding the scientific degree of Doctor of Philosophy since the work complies with all the necessary requirements according to the procedure by St. Petersburg State University. Thank you for your attention. Now I give the floor to Professor Klaus Mans, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your kind invitation to St. Petersburg. My review, I think, is well known to you, and let me start with a remark. This is an excellent analysis of the axiomatic methods in theory building, which is based on the historical development of axiomatization in mathematics from Euclid, Hilbert, and Bourbaki up to modern category theory and univalent foundations of mathematics. And the author, as it was also explained before, aims at an architecture of theory which he calls constructive axiomatic methods, but which must not be confused with mathematical constructivism and intuitionism in the strict mathematical sense. Now, very short, coming to the first chapter of the thesis from Euclid to Hilbert. Here, the author explains the differences between Euclid's and Hilbert's axiomatic method. And perhaps you know, Euclid distinguishes between postulates, that means rules of constructions, in his case with compass and ruler, and formal axioms of propositions. And later on, in the Hilbert approach, there are only formal schemes of propositions. But there is one point starting in the history with Euclid, that is the so-called generic method. And this concept, which is more relaxed than construction by compass and rulers, this kind of generic method is crucial for the understanding of Andrei Rodin's concept of construction. Chapter 2 relates to the structuralistic approach in mathematics, which is connected with the name of Bourbaki. And it's very interesting, by the way, how the author reflects the influence of this approach in the 60s and 70s. I personally was educated in mathematics in this Bourbaki style, and he also explains the disadvantages of the so-called new math in the US, but also in the former Soviet Union. An interesting aspect in this chapter is the application of the axiomatic method to physics, biology, and computer science. It's a pity that these parts are rather short in the thesis, especially concerning physics a little bit. I missed the famous application of Hilbert of his axiomatic method to physics, namely to the first unified field theory of gravitation and electromagnetism. Very interesting and important is the application in computer science, but I will come back to that later on. Now, I think chapter 3 is a highlight of the whole thesis, considering the novel axiomatic approaches, first with the topper theory and category theory in mathematics, and second, the famous homotopy type theory with the celebrated Fields Medal winner, Russian mathematician Vladimir Voivodsky. And but the last chapter, chapter 4, is a crucial chapter for the whole thesis, but because here constructive method in the sense of Rodin is explained, and it was already mentioned before that must not be confused with effective constructivism in the mathematical sense. It dates back to Hilbert and Bernays, 1934, and they developed in this time or suggested a more general axiomatic method. The standard axiomatization in the sense of Hilbert is only a part of that in the sense of a hypothetical general method. Now, my point here in my whole review is that nevertheless, the constructive meaning in the strict mathematical sense is crucial for especially Voevodsky's approach. That means for the modern kind of axiomatization. And here I relate to the development of homotopy type theory from abstract mathematical category theory. And here is Andrei Rodin, an expert. His dissertation was about that topic, and the connection with the proof-checking methods in the sense of computer science. And that was the main idea of Voevodsky, because of these contradictions and bugs in which are possible in modern theoretical mathematics. How can we secure, how can we make safe these abstract methods? And his suggestion was by a kind of type theoretical proof-checking methods, and that is the idea of the whole approach of so-called HOT, that means homotopy type theory. And Voevodsky suggested a formalization which has a hardcore of a so-called univalent foundation with a new kind of axiom, the axiom of univalence. Roughly speaking, everything is preserved by equivalence. That means even higher dimensional objects from set theory and to category theory. And again, behind that's the idea, how can we prove in this abstract theoretical spheres of modern mathematics, how can they be secured by proof-checking methods? And these methods must be constructive. That is the point. And therefore, I claimed to explain it a little bit more in details relating to Thierry Caucan, the French logician and mathematician, who together with Voevodsky developed a homotopy type theory with several other colleagues, and was one of the authors of a proof-checking method, which with already practical applications nowadays, proof-checking of software programs. And now my point is that these proof-checking methods in category theory and in topos theory and so on, they can in the end be justified by constructive methods in the strict mathematical sense of constructivism. And that was recently proved by Thierry Caucan with this so-called cubical type theory, which allows a constructive interpretation of the univalence axiom. Now, coming to the end and considering again the concept of Andrei Rodin's construction, I would suggest to call it generic axiomatic method. The nice idea of his approach is that there is not, even in mathematics and in the natural science, there is not only a sequence of paradigm shifts in science, such as in the concept of Thomas Kuhn. You know, there is one revolution and then it is overcome by the next revolution and so on, and the old stuff is forgotten. No, because the great merit of the author here is that he illustrates that the old generic methods, which dates back to the days of Euclid, is nevertheless today very fruitful. That means it is integrated in modern methodological ideas. And this kind of dialectical approach in the author's explanation reminds me of Hegel, of course. You know, in the Hegelian tradition, that means there is something transformed, but the old approach is integrated. In the German Hegelian vocabulary, that means it is aufgehoben. That means integrated in this method. And I think that is a very nice result in the end of this habilitation thesis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mainzer. И сейчас мы переходим к следующему.
And now we move to the second review. Hello, Dr. Karolina Chorne. Can you hear me well? In my opinion, the constructive axiomatic method, the development of which is the main result by Andrei V, opens the new perspective from a historical and epistemological approach, which accumulate not only propositional but procedural knowledge. The author, alarmed by scholastic so-called trends in the modern logic that neglect epistemic consideration, offers the personal navigation in the problem area, the boundaries of which are delineated on one hand by interpretation of logical mathematical axiomatic theory as a tool of constructing speculative mental worlds, and cheap experiments. The task to substantiate epistemologically the actual practice of axiomatic thinking by working scientists make this area a field of joint responsibility of the scientific community and the philosopher epistemologist. And the latter should comply with the non-trivial balance of descriptive and normative approaches to the scientific praxis. The positive aspect of the study is the choice of quality samples, such as the universal foundation of mathematics. In the first chapter of the thesis, the author slips between Scylla antiquarianism and Charybdis of presentism, represents the role of non-propositional principle in Euclid's geometry, and reveals the features which make it akin to the project of univalent foundations of mathematics. Attention is also paid to the mathematical logicism, to the principles which, according to the author, can be used together with the polemics of Hilbert and Brouwer. In the second chapter, we can see the overview of the practice of the development of the philosophy of mathematics of the 20th century. The axiomatic approach and the spirit of Bourbaki and non-friendliness of these ideas to the science and technological development. The author explains the sense for this unfriendliness. At the same time, it is shown the inadequacy of the improvement of Hilbert method to solve this problem, which led to the Stanford Revolution, which characterized scientific theories by class. And the third chapter, which has the main results of the thesis, has the axiomatic approach in mathematics, the beginning of the end of early 21st century. These are the theory of elementary topos by William Lever and homotopy type theory by Vladimir Vygotsky. Despite the fact that Lever did not aim at revising the standard understanding of axiomatic theory, his axiomatic approach is different from the standard approach. And the possibility to talk about the internal logic of topos violates the traditional order, according to which logic is linked to the base level of the theory, not having the logical construct. Despite that, Lever did not talk about the unity of geometry and logic, but this is the formal axiomatic order that shows axiological construction and indicates serious problems of the standard version of the formal axiomatic method. The use of Gansen time system, including axiomatic theories, is not standard. The author provides convincing arguments, including the history of science, and in here I have a remark. It leaves the issue of criteria of logical and extra-logical open. The extension to formal theories can be reduced to the interpretation of normative and descriptive when we talk about the formal theories without the deductive element. The axiomatic architecture and the use of internal logic might move the standard boundaries of logical and non-logical procedures. The research provides two criteria for the logical. Firstly, a fairly traditional way, inference rule, which is valid in some specific domain, is not valid in other subject areas, is not logical. For example, if we talk about Euclid's axiomatic system, which is not universal and limited to the geometric domain in a way, is characterized as proto-logical and non-logical. That's one criterion. On the other hand, moving towards the homotopy type theory, the author interprets as logical only the formal confusions in HOTT that are limited propositions, while formal confusions that include higher types are interpreted as geometric architecture. The question of correlating the criteria of universality and propositionality for logical procedure needs additional clarification. But on the whole, the thesis is a completed scientific work, opening new direction in the philosophy of logic and mathematics, as well as the philosophy of science and technology in general. And Rodin meets requirements for awarding the academic degree of doctor. Thank you very much, and we move to Ivan Mykirtumov. Ivan Borisovich, we cannot hear you. Is everything fine? Well, my review is the following. The research is devoted to classic but never outdated European science and the topic of axiomatic construction and the theory and form of proof. Since the ancient Greek mathematicians invented demonstrative proofs, this power doesn't give rest to representatives of other spheres of knowledge, which are busy restoring substantiation points of view in the fields of politics, law, and morality. The creation of theoretical logic of Aristotle was motivated by the process of demonstrative mathematical proofs, both in the field of teaching and the field of research. Which could be adopted to the natural science and then reasoning with any other subjects. Thus, doctrine of proof is a part of theory of science. Aristotle noted that in full and genuine sense, the proofs take place only in mathematics and can be also used in other sciences. If the grounds of the essence are induction, fixation, and as well as inverted reasoning about the need, then having established the essence things, one can already deduce one another of its property. Heuristic, the syllogism acquires meaning at the moment when it suggests looking for the current cause as a middle term. And here the demonstrative proof is primarily, because of its structure, indicates the missing elements in knowledge. According to Zaitsev, the effectiveness of mathematic proof pushed the sphere of democratic polis to the development of discursive freedom and justification process. Ancient rhetorics and logic are always relevant and should only be expanded. Euclid's Elements forms an integral part of program of re-education and became for centuries a model of Mendelian knowledge as such. And the reasoning behind this was also the idea that it can be applied in various fields of knowledge, thus using axiomatic construction as a research tool. Axiomatization of arithmetic occurred in the 19th century, and axiomatic methods and demonstrative proofs in geometry are not usually interesting for school children, while identical transformation of the arithmetic and algebra seem interesting to them. But both of these ideas are very interesting, and writing works discusses these ideas. The proof methods in Euclid are closely related to pedagogical practice, but they add personalized standards of political and legal public rhetoric. And examples from Socrates, Demosthenes, Pericles, and others. Thus, oral discussion in Greece defined the environment in which the style of Euclidean proof could no longer be considered otherwise. Thus, Dionic and actional versions of the Axiomatic proof in Euclid, as well as the formulation of alternatives, can be considered as a historical parallel in the latest Buddhist logic. The subsequent development took place outside the competitive environment. Thus, axiomatic construction of knowledge attracted people not related to science. On the other hand, scientific discourse made demonstrative evidence unnecessary because the was related to metaphysical sphere inspired by metaphysics of Plato and Aristotle. Discussing logicism in the research, Andrei Rodin compares the metaphysical premises of Frege and the ontology of some other areas. And I would like to say that Frege's logicism is rooted in the Leibnization of the 19th century, which was cultivated by many authors later on. Thus, following Leibniz, the idea that the reason means to be the realization of the logical. Modern ontological concepts do not go that far. First of all, they are related to the semantics of natural language. Thus, identifying mathematics from logic resulted in an approximated theory by the set theory. The history of research on the foundation of mathematics is presented in this work, and which is linked with the theory of knowledge. And I would like to say that the formulas fundamentals of Hilbert and the Bourbaki Encyclopedia are closely intertwined. Hilbert, we know, distanced himself from theoretical and cognitive problems from Frege, who created an anthropological centralist version of Kantian philosophy. There is an ideal element of proof which functions as a qualitative element. If a mathematical object is formal, then we cannot postulate its existence but build the conclusion of the hypothesis of formal system of evidence. Eliminability means that these hypotheses and their research do not affect the proof system itself. The latter is determined by the formal axiomatics, while the theory of specific mathematical objects is given by the content axiomatics. Hertz's theory became the basis for Gertzen's calculus of natural inference, in where the word natural recalls the rhetorical ambitions of mathematicians. It should be noted that Hilbert's method of ideal elements has certain common ground with Ramsey and Wittgenstein. The latter describe knowledge as a system of tautologies. Using tautologies, one can formulate the truth even about the non-existent or impossible, so that the introduction of such objects does not violate something in the correctness of truthfulness. Formally, this principle is realized in semantics, starting with Tarski. with due liberation of the metalinguist context, represents a tautology. Hilbert's formalism arrives at the idea of semantics to juxtapose mathematical functions, and intuitionism combined with the sensualist or sensorimotor attitude brings computability to light. In here, intuition has the idea of the search of internal discernment of the obvious. Moving on to new versions of foundation mathematics, following Hilbert's failure, logicism and formalism fail behind rhetorically motivated demonstrative proofs. Leibniz, be it phenomenological or analogical concept, talks about the substrate of the mathematical and logical as commutability. On the other hand, this allows us to close the question of the grounds, declare the program of logicism and formalism as a result of incorrect posing the questions. Be it the Gamma abacus paper or electromechanical counting machines, the question arises about the genesis of theoretical mathematics. Mathematics is substrate and height abstraction of mathematical concepts separated by a gap in explanation that new foundation of mathematics called upon to overcome. Set theory is then left behind, and different lambda calculus systems, combinatorial logics, category theories initiated by Lever, constructive theory of Martin-Löf, and finally Vojevodsky, HCT theory. I'm not going to ponder upon the details of the research work by Rodin. I'd like to talk about the main ideas, that is defending the paradigm of mathematical proof and an axiomatic system, which opposes the propositionalist understanding of proof as a sequence of statements connected among themselves according to some fixed rules. This also applies to mathematical objects and subdivided into types. Unclear intuitions and similarly obvious things are rejected here equally degree. New theory of types ambiguously answers the question of what objects, so that nothing cannot be unconstructed according to rules. Talking about Vojevodsky's theory as the most productive and promising, Andrei Rodin shows how the entire historically developed problematics of axiomatic theories find its solution in specific constructive ontology of a special kind, which can be viewed as an axiomatic theory with a formal action interpretation. For philosophy of science, the results presented have a very essential meaning. The foundation find a voice outside the narrow circle of specialists. The work makes the dissertation extremely useful when you take into account the accessibility of the presentation. The propositions put forward seem to be well-founded, the results are valuable, original, and the level of work is exceptionally high. The disadvantages include the following. The studies of transition of Euclid's proof into the logical could be provided with more detail. This work was written in the 90s, if we talk about the Bidukov, under the leadership of Nikolai Shanin. Secondly, some fluency is present in certain parts of the work, and we can learn very little about constructivism, but it would be very interesting to involve this direction. There is some typos in the work, including the formalists, but however, this does not detract anything from the merits of the work. Thus, I consider that Andrei Rodin can be awarded the doctoral, the degree of doctor in the major philosophy of science and technology. Thank you very much, Ivan Borisovich, and we move on to Sergey Nikonenko. Can everyone hear me well? I'm the next one to present my review. I would like to point out that the research by Andrei Rodin is written on a novel topic which has not been developed much in the research works in our country. Starting from 1920s, substantial logical and mathematical literature on axiomatics was being created by the representatives of neo-positivism and analytical philosophy. And these works are not well known in Russia and is not very often translated into Russian. And I would like to note something which hasn't been noted previously. The author has very important empirical novelty. And I would like to pay our attention, the attention to all the members of the Dissertation Council, the list of reference, which has 304 books. The majority of the works are in English. So the author did not only great research, but also translation work, since the majority of works were not previously translated into Russian, and the author had to use the original. I greatly estimate the fact that the author uses the plan, the approach of analytical logics, using the ideas by Gödel. But nevertheless, this is the plan of the Titans, Russell, Wittgenstein, and some other key figures of the sphere. And this is not included extensively in the work, but this is an advantage since the work has to have empirical novelty as well. I was able to cooperate with the researcher, and I consider this work mature work. Much can be said about the influence of these results and the advantages of this work. But the members of the Dissertation Council have to express their remarks. Well, I would like to say that all my remarks refer to the idea that the author may be overdid the job, and there are certain problems. The author was a little bit unorthodox and didn't talk about the level of the development of the topic. The author definitely knows the works related to his topic, but I suppose that this theoretical chapter should be present in the research work. The results presented in the work are novel. We need the background to provide justification to them being new. Secondly, the second point of provisions for defense about the Lever's approach. Well, I do not fully understand what is the theoretical idea of the author of the work, and why is Lever the key author for the research. Why personally Lever is mentioned in one of the propositions for defense. Well, Lever definitely is an important author, but I want to understand how important is he. Then, if we talk about the composition style, the chapter 2.3, 2.3.2, biology, doesn't comply with the general idea of the work, and physics and biology are not fully covered, and there is only one page of text if we talk about biology. And, well, these disadvantages are definitely minor. The author created an original text of great merit, but certain typos are also present, not categorical logic, but logic of category. In this respect, I'd like to note that this is innovative text, substantial, which has a lot of reference material with novel ideas. And of course, it definitely includes certain points for discussion. But nevertheless, the above-mentioned remarks do not undermine the merit of the research work, and the thesis complies with the regulation for awarding the degree of Doctor of Philosophy of Science and Technique. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Sergey Vitalyevich, and I give the floor to Alexander Pechankin. Dear members of the Dissertation Council, can you hear me? It was a great pleasure for me to read this research work. Well, I've never read the works of such level in our country, unfortunately. Well, as for the essence, the majority of text talks about the categorization.
В этом отношении крайне интересные со всеми ее интересно.
It is very interesting. The historical and scientific approach of the author, and philosophical approach, and philosophically logical approach in a way to the idea. And this work is above competition, definitely. As for remarks, I suppose that certain details seem to be unnecessary. Since it is not linked to the dissertation itself. The majority of members of the Dissertation Council talk about the theory of categories. My remarks mainly deal with the mathematical inaccuracies or typos. When editing the text of the research work of the thesis, it should be taken into account, but in many cases, that's just a misprint. Certain accuracy should be added to the formulation of the category theory. The author deserves the awarding of the doctorate. My review is the last one, and I wouldn't repeat the ideas about the structures and the positive aspects of the dissertation. I would like to talk about the additional ideas, I suppose, related to the fact how this dissertation is linked to the novel ideas. In my opinion, two ideas should be noted. First of all, the historical epistemology approach is effectively used when Andrei Rodin talks about Euclid theory with the basis of axiomatic approach. This inference might look logical, since many of the mathematicians use Euclid's ideas, but Andrei Rodin uses the principles of Euclid as the source of possible alternatives. In this respect, this approach overcomes the extreme of presentism, the historical study of science, suggesting explanation of the past based on its inclusion in the modern scientific studies. And in this concept, the inclusion of elements by Euclid in the constructive method proposed by Andrei Rodin, one would expect more attention to the methodological side of the dissertation. The author is aware of the difference between the presentist and Aquarian approaches in the history of science, given quite a lot of attention in Russian epistemology. But how these approaches are indicated in the text of the study does not fully disclose them. If we turn to the text of Mikhail Rozov or Natalia Kuznetsova, Andrei Rodin could use the fruitful strategies of antiquarian studies, only some of which are represented in the text. The second aspect, which I consider of importance, is the attention not to propositional but to procedural knowledge, not to knowledge of what, but to knowledge how. In this context, not only procedural aspect is emphasized, but importantly the productive aspect, wherein the production of knowledge is not considered as an extra-scientific or auxiliary or secondary element, but as an irreplaceable element of mathematical proof itself. As for my remarks or questions, I would like to say the following. The first remark is about the novelty. In Andrei's work, the major issues on architecture of axiomatic approach and the method of the scientific works, also the reference books are provided to talk about the general development of the topic. But I would like to know how the author himself sees the novelty of the approach in the context of modern discussion. In the idea of the lack of direct analogies does not disclose the novelty. The thesis talks about the reconsideration of the axiomatic approach and its influence for sciences outside the sphere of mathematics. How can the constructive axiomatic method be used in natural science in the context of extended usage? We need to talk about the boundaries. Should there be any limitation to the construction axiomatic method in any of the scientists linked to the types of the areas and the methodology used in the sciences? And this question is related to the discussion on the topic, not to the remarks. But I would like to say that definitely the thesis meets the requirements established by St. Petersburg State University on the procedure for awarding academic degrees in St. Petersburg State University. And this is academic work of high standard, and definitely the doctoral candidate deserves to be awarded the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in specialty in the major Philosophy of Science and Technology. And I move on to the questions of the doctoral candidate. And Andrei Vyacheslaevich, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. First of all, I would definitely like to thank all the members of the Dissertation Council who studied my thesis and expressed very important remarks and certain ideas that I would like to provide answers for. And I'll start with the last questions by Lada Shapovalova, and the same question was voiced by Sergey Nikonenko. What's the novelty and the development of the topic? Maybe my approach was more formal, and I'll try to improve now. the project in here is twofold. We need to view it in two scales. The first related to the philosophical logic and the philosophy of mathematics. And the second scale, so to say, using the name of the old book by Vladimir Smirnov, Logical Methods of Analysis of Scientific Knowledge. If we talk about the philosophical logic and the logic and philosophy of mathematics, in terms of polemics, I talked about the revision of Hilbert-style axiomatic method. And in this respect, as I said, I am basing my propositions not on any direct predecessors. There are many authors who motivate me. So this way, my approach is unorthodoxal. So it is new and novel in this respect. I do not have direct predecessors. So that's my answer to the question. That's the novelty. And there are many motivations in this respect. As for novelty, I can also say that we had many discussions with Vladimir V and continue participating in conferences and cooperate with the people who work on this project. I want to say there are very few philosophers. The majority are mathematicians, computer science technicians. Thus, published works dedicated to the philosophical analysis of ambivalent foundations exists, and it all has been cited in my work. But this is the area that whatever you do, it will definitely be new and novel. This is what's related to the philosophical logic and the philosophy of mathematics. As for the second scale, and I will simultaneously answer to the remark by Sergey Vitalyevich and Lada Vladimirovna that this section 2.3 is incomplete. Well, of course it is incomplete, and I understand it really well, but it was very important for me to include it in the research because the idea that mathematics and axiomatic theory in particular, that they should be related to scientific theory, that mathematical logic is not a thing in itself. It was very important for my entire project. Thus, I used this approach and I tried to compromise, understanding the incompleteness of this part of the research. I decided to integrate it into my thesis. But I will work on this section more. If we talk about the second scale, about the development and the novelty, I want to say that I'm continuing this semantics approach, changing it, and my approach might be considered non-statement view, non-propositional view. It's different to Super's approach. But many ideas of Farson might be better implemented with the help of my approach. But this is an idea which requires proof, unlike the standard approach by Bourbaki, especially related to Benfer's concept of experimental design. In order to formally represent what formal design is, this method is more applicable. Then I move on to Professor Mainzer's review about the idea of constructive. Well, I use it in a special sense, but it has historical precedent, which is not entirely my personalized proposition, and it was used by Hilbert and Bernays in the first volume of the monography, The Basis of Mathematics, 1934. As for this specific approach and specific meaning, I think that we talk about the additional sense of the notion constructive. The idea of constructive in mathematics and logic exists as a non-formal idea, but it has at the same time many formal definitions which differ from each other. And this aspect which I use is important, and it can be found in Hilbert and Bernays' works. Andrei Kolmogorov also talks about it in this respect, talking about this genetic approach. And in this respect, it evolves in homotopy type theory thanks to homotopical hierarchy. It is not constructive in entirely different sense, but it is in a different aspect which can be differentiated. But Mr. Löf talked about his type theory intuitionist, and this is a different meaning in a sense. And this is what Professor Mainzer finally said, that in classical traditional sense this is also constructive. But as for the term itself, I really like this proposition of using not maybe genetic constructive, but generic construction, because this term constructive is overloaded, the same as the term classic is overloaded as well, so it might mean anything. So this generic constructivism is a great term. As for Kuhne, well, I agree absolutely. If we talk about the discussion with Popper, of course I support Popper, and I would like to say that his discourse with Gigel is not understandable. As for the role of William Lever, well, of course, definitely there is a personal role. This is the person who influenced me personally, and I tried to distance myself from it on the personalized point of view. And I wanted to talk about the idea, not the personalia. But this idea of internal logic is quite original, in my opinion. It is his invention, and it remains important. It has a very clear view and is used in univalent foundations of HTT. As for the issue of Helena Drogalina, the idea of the boundaries of the logical, the criteria of the logical. When I was writing my thesis, I would like to explain what I was doing. My idea was to use the conservative approach, because I understood that if I start systematically consider this aspect, then I need a separate thesis, as was done by Denis Bonnet, for example, in Paris. So that's a huge topic, so to say. And if we talk about classical logic, I would like to say that quantors are logical, and they provide, and the incidental relationship is non-logical. And the same is about a homotopy type theory. The differences that I used are standard differences. Maybe Voevodsky was the first to develop it, but it is usually used. And I absolutely agree that it has a principal issue of the criteria of logics, which has to be researched. So I had a very conservative approach in this respect. So I consider this issue closed, but I do understand that this is incomplete and more detail has to be included. As for the remark by Helena Lysanyuk, we discussed it for a long time. Why about these two floors, two stories? When I talk about these two stories, well, I have a standard approach, and there is even a book by Tarski on methodology of deductive sciences, the introduction to the logic of methodology of deductive sciences, where he talks about this two-story construct. And if we talk about logical semantics, I mean a not philosophical approach, but a very specific thing, which is now called theoretically modal semantics in Tarski sense. His approach to the logical, in order to explain what logical deduction is, what logical inference is, thus to explain logical constants. This is what I meant, and this is the construct that I'm criticizing. So I'm trying to find the alternative way in the theory of topos and the homotopy type theory. The alternatives, which I name non-standards in a way. The main idea is that these levels are not autonomous. These logical levels are not autonomous. So when we have, in a certain sense, we can call them ground level, upper level, but these upper level have logical functions. They are projected on the logical level. In this sense, the logic, metaphorically explained, is logic is a special case of geometry, but they are entwined. We cannot fix logic and then create a certain theory based on this logic. And this is a great difference, in my opinion, which greatly changes the whole methodology, if we use this word by Tarski, this term by Tarski. And if referring to Hilbert, why I deal with axioms, not with the inferences, well, I meant that the Hilbert style was in fixating the rule, and he has two, which include modus ponens, and thus changing the axioms, we might construct any theories. And I wanted to say that this is not so, and if we use Ginson style theories, we might expand from the domain of pure logic and arithmetic, from formal arithmetic. We can use it for a broader class of theories. So the method that I call the constructive method might be better called generic method, which means that this axiomatic freedom of exchanging axioms might require choosing the rules and foundations based on what we're doing, and not based on linguistic intuitions and so on and so forth. So this method is based on the use of different theories, and in the cubic theory of types there are other rules which allow us to constructively implement the axiom of unknowable. That was a very important aspect of my proposition. I'm very thankful to Ivan Mikrotumov for this historical insight and additional information. I would like to say that Hilbert distanced himself from the theoretical cognitive problems. Well, in this respect, he was not a philosopher, of course. He did not write long philosophical works. But nevertheless, he expressed rhetorical ideas publicly on philosophical ideas, and he created mathematical projects trying to use different philosophical ideas. And the main philosophical idea, which remains quite stable, that was expressed, for example, in 1900 in Paris, and then in 1930 in Königsberg, for example, there is the radio broadcast, which can be found still. And he said that nothing unknowable can be found in mathematics. And as he said in Königsberg, wir müssen wissen, wir werden wissen. So his project was to create mathematics in such a way that any questions could have an answer. And in this sense, this remark is in line with my ideas that this method is good to obtain such meta-theoretical results, which are greatly discussed by philosophers. But at the same time, it is less applicable for more prosaic approach, such as presenting scientific theories and educational purposes, although this method should serve these purposes as well. So this is kind of additional trait of this method. But this additional trait became more important. And finally, the most important question was said by Ms. Shapovalova about the boundaries, and I'd like to be very brief. Well, first of all, about I have just answered this issue, this meta-theoretical issues and the issue of epistemic completeness. Well, I don't think that it should take all the philosophical attention. And my thesis, why didn't I mention Gödel, for example, was to look at a different side. Not because they're great people and I'm using the ideas of less well-known scientists. Well, I'm doing the dealing with the ideas less important for philosophical analysis. But non-constructive perspective in mathematics and in science will always act as this impetus of scientific progress. Without such ideas, which are beyond any possible experience, if we cite Kant, then expansion of the scientific experience which we experience throughout our lives would be impossible. Non-rejecting the role of meta-theoretical approach in epistemology, I consider the issue of the boundaries of the experience empirical. So I think it's important to try to do something and to see what is the result. Limitation theorems might help us in a way, but I consider that the final answers are mostly empirical and not the result of our theoretical ideas. And finally, I would definitely like to thank all the participants of the Dissertation Council for more specific remarks. Professor Mainz, I'd like to thank for mentioning 2 monographies of 2018. I'd like to thank Ivan Mikrotumov mentioning the candidate thesis by Byrykov in 1999, which I was able to look through this week. And I'd like to thank Alexander Pechankin for misprints found in the formulas. Once again, I'd like to thank all the members of the Council for your remarks and questions. Dear members, the members of the Dissertation Council, is everybody satisfied with the answers? Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, are you satisfied with the answers? Yes, I see. Then we move on to the next additional point. 2 people who do not form part of the Dissertation Council will be given the floor, and the first is Tatiana Chernigovskaya, who is the head of the Department Problems of Convergence of the Natural Sciences, the director of the Institute of Cognitive Sciences, the Doctor of Biological Sciences, a corresponding member of the Russian Academy of Sciences in Petersburg State University. Tatiana Vladimirovna, you are given the floor. Thank you very much. I'm very thankful to the Dissertation Council to be able to have the floor, because I would like to say that this work is very intelligent, and it is very important to mention them, because not all the theses are like that. Andrei Rodin has a very important international reputation, which is a fact. And right were those who said that this thesis is only formal, and he can be considered the PhD long ago, and this is like only the formalization of this fact. I'd like to note two aspects. The first is a banal aspect. The more I've been working in science, and I'm an active scientist, and the more I work as a teacher and a lecturer, the more I see that philosophy is a separate, and I would even say snobbish, but for me it is a positive concept area. I would like to say that students, no matter what job they get later on, should receive formal education in philosophy, not in the terms of who was Socrates and where did Kant live, but the way we're listening to it today. And to mathematics. So students have to have education in philosophy and mathematics. So the first point was successfully done by Andrei V, who lectures on the department, the head of which I am. Well, I have no idea how he manages to explain it to the students, but according to the feedback from the students understand what Mr. Rodin tells them. The second aspect is from the area of science as such. Since I deal with cognition and the brain and so on, a very dangerous terrain, I'd like to say that these areas, people in these areas should know what you know. These areas know nothing about it. And I'm fully aware of what I'm saying. Andrei Rodin said that any question might potentially have an answer if the question is rightly formulated. The problem is that the questions are not rightly formulated. The experimental science, where I've been working for many years, and it's very successful, where millions of people work, and it has substantial funding. But do the people know what they're looking for? No, they do not know, because the questions are not formulated. People go to the tomographers, let's say, and look what will click in the head if the person is looking at the picture. This is not scientific issue. There is no only causation, but there is no even correlation. I understand that we are pressed for time, and it's a great pity that we cannot discuss it in details because of lack of time. The second aspect is not related to the fact that scientists cannot think or do not try to think. And this is what I meant when I was talking. What is mathematics? Mathematics is the way our brain is formed. The mathematics reflects the structure of our brain. Mathematics reflects the universe, and we do not have the neural network to see the universe in its entirety. And the third aspect is that mathematics is such because of civilizational issues. Civilization might have developed differently, then we wouldn't have syllogisms. That I would be against following Francis Bacon. Why do you talk about this logical constructs? Well, I wouldn't like to continue my speech, pathetic speech in a way. It's not a provocative idea. I hope it's not the last time I'm mentioning this. I'd like to say that this is a very important, very comprehensive research work. I'm very happy that Andrei Vячеславovich proposed it for defense, and I would like to propose Andrei to participate in our seminar. And I have a seminar on cognitive sciences for many years. Many people usually speak at this conference. Professor Mainzer also participated there, and Georgia Penrose participated there, who is a Nobel laureate. And it was thanks to Andrei Rodin that we were able to invite him. These are serious discussions which allow us to discuss different aspects, which is very important. Thank you very much for your attention. I will definitely accept your invitation and be a part of your conference. And then I give the floor to Nikolai Vavilov, the professor of the Faculty of Mathematics and Computer Sciences, the Doctor of Physics and Mathematics of St. Petersburg State University. Nikolai Alexandrovich, the floor is yours. For me, it was very surprising to know that Andrei is not PhD yet, because I've heard many of his reports and I've known many of his works related to mathematics and philosophy, and I was absolutely sure that Andrei has long been the Doctor of Sciences. And I fully agree with the idea expressed by Tatiana Vladimirovna. Andrei has established high international reputation in the area, professional relationships, and so on. On my behalf, as a mathematician, I would like to commend what is going on in here. Mathematics, if we talk about mathematics, any area inside it has three stages: mathematical, philosophical, and computational. If we talk about great innovations which could be found in the history of mathematics, if we talk about the Greek wonder or miracle, or what happened in the end of the 17th century, what happened in the beginning of the 20th century and in the middle of the 20th century, visionaries and imaginative people were behind it. Well, it's more difficult for me to talk about the Greece in this respect, but if we talk about Leibniz, Hilbert, and so on, we understand their influence and their impact. The third chapter is of most interest for me. The first two chapters are the ideas that I've known since my childhood, since I was taught within the framework of Bourbaki mathematics. And most works dedicated to the philosophy of mathematics written by non-mathematicians stop there. They they think the way that nothing interesting happened in mathematics since that time. But in reality, since then, mathematics experienced several similar revolutions. And the new ideas, which are interesting for a wide range of people, including mathematicians, is the discussion of the contemporary project, started by a great visionary, Vladimir Voevodsky. And it is unique, and it is taking place nowadays, and philosophy and mathematics, philosophy in terms of the main ideas before the formalization, before we talk about the justification of theorems, and before we make it into algorithms and put it into the computer. But in this domain, it is done simultaneously. Vladimir Voevodsky created Kirk programs and talked about theorems. And what Andrei did in this respect is absolutely unique, because he understands the contemporary mathematics, which is very rare among people who are not practical mathematicians. And I found a lot of new practical things from the third chapter of the thesis. And I think that this will be of high interest for many mathematicians. And I would like to invite Andrei to our colloquium, because these ideas are extremely interesting. And everything is taking place simultaneously, because the proof in the higher theory of categories are so difficult that we definitely cannot control them. This is the idea of Voevodsky, that it has to be done simultaneously with inserting it into the computer. I don't think that this is the final response and final success. I think that mathematics is going to change in the future. But as of today, this is one of the real aspects of mathematics. And many were able to formalize the proof of many grand theorems, as Thomson-Phi theorem, for example, that nobody expected such a thing within the current age. And that Andrei is one of the best specialists in the area is undoubtful. And the broad historical context of this thesis is of huge interest. So we have the general comprehension behind it, history, and contemporary mathematics behind it. So I'm absolutely sure that this thesis is great. Andrei also conducts classes in our faculty and gives lectures on the history and philosophy of mathematics to our students. And this is the person who can speak to our students about these issues, since he can discuss modern and contemporary mathematics, not only the things that happened in ancient Greece. I consider this work of great importance, and I'm extremely happy that Andrei finally decided to become a PhD, and we should welcome it. It should have happened earlier. There are many things, there are many positive comments about constructivism, computers, and so on and so forth, but it would be better to mention that under different circumstances, and I'm sure that we'll cooperate in the future as well. And there will be occasions to discuss it. One of the problems nowadays is that mathematics, modern mathematics, is detached from wide educated circles, and Andrew is one of the people who restores this link. Thank you. Thank you very much, Nikolai Alexandrovich. Are there any questions to the doctoral candidates from those who do not form part of the dissertation council? No. Are there any questions that were received in order of feedback following the results of the broadcast of the meeting of the dissertation council? No questions. Then I have the question to the participants who are in remote access mode. Do the members of the dissertation council and those present, the applicant himself, any unanswered questions or some unclear issues related to the remote access mode, maybe? If there are any, voice them, please. No, nobody has any questions. Then, dear colleagues, we move to the final part. And my question is, we have now the opportunity, before the start of voting, to announce the break to discuss the results of the defense with muted broadcast sound. How do you think, my dear colleagues, do we need such a break to discuss the results of the defense? No. There are no other opinions. No break is needed. All right? If the discussion of the result is not required, then we'll continue the meeting and we proceed to voting. In this case, the opinion of each member of the Dissertation Council has to be voiced publicly and independently. So, now we are discussing the issue of awarding Andrei Rodin the doctoral degree, and I announce the roll call. I remind that the decision of the Dissertation Council is considered positive if more than half of the participants voted positively and not less than 2/3 of the members, according to the clause 23. Yelena Lisenuk, member of the council, your opinion, please. The dissertation. I can't hear you, I'm sorry. Dear colleagues, the doctoral candidate deserves being awarded Nikartumov Ivan. I'm for. Thank you. Council member Sergey Nikonenko. I'm for. The thesis complies with all the requirements and deserves being awarded the scientific degree. Yelena Drogalina, your opinion? Yes, it deserves. Pichonkin Alexander, your opinion, please. Yes, the work corresponds the requirements. Thank you. And the council member, Professor Meinzer, your opinion, please.
I already said I strongly recommend the acceptance of the doctoral thesis of Andrei Rodin.
Thank you very much. И я председатель совета шипового.
And me, the head of the council, my opinion is that Andrei Rodin deserves the awarding of the defense of doctoral degree. So we conduct the word counting. Dear colleagues and guests, out of the 7 members of the council participating in the voting of the Dissertation Council, voted for 7 people, voted against No people. Abstained? No. The decision to award Rodin Andrei the scientific degree of Doctoral Philosophy on scientific major 090008 Philosophy of Science and Technique is adopted. Thank you very much for the participation in the meeting. Dear colleagues, due to the fact that our meeting is held with the participation in the remote access mode, do the members of the Citation Council or the doctoral candidate or others present comments, questions on the procedure of holding the meeting? Dear colleagues, I require answer from each and every one of you. Professor Mainzer, do you have any questions or comments to the procedure?
No, it was a pleasure for me for the first time to enjoy this kind of academic procedures in Russia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Я должна...
Then I need to give the final word to the applicant. So, Andrei Rodin, the floor is yours. Well, I would definitely like to thank for this great honor for your high appraisal of my thesis. I'd like to thank Universitetskaya and Nikolai Vavilov. And I have a list of thankfulness, and I won't name each and every one right now, but I would in particular like to thank, unfortunately, late Vladimir Voevodsky, without whom my thesis was impossible to be created. Thank you, Andrei Rodin. Once again, I would like to offer to congratulate the applicant. So let's clap. I suppose the clapping is in order. The meeting is closed. Thank you for your participation, and turn off the live broadcast, please.